Today, I am joined by Dr. Marion McClary, who is a professor of biology and chair of the Department of Biological Sciences at Fairleigh Dickinson University in Madison, New Jersey. Welcome, Dr. McClary.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
We're so excited to have you. Dr. McClary received his Bachelor of Science in Marine Science from Richard Stockton State College of New Jersey, which is now Stockton University, and received his PhD in zoology from Duke University. Dr. McClary serves on the Urban Coast Institute Advisory Committee, the Northern New Jersey Committee Foundation Environmental Advisory Board, the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions Board of Trustees, and the Hackensack River Greenway Advisory Board, which is phenomenal. And we're going to dive deeper into just all of the wonderful things that he does. First, I would like to start by having you tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about your field in the biological sciences. Where did it all begin for you?
Okay, well, when I was young, I was a shy child, and you could sort of say I was in my shell, is the expression goes. And in biology class, we dissected a clam, and I kind of saw myself like that clam, because the clam has a shell, and if the clam wanted to be in its shell, it could, or if it wanted to open up and interact with with its surrounding world, it could. So I kind of saw myself as that clam and decided, I want to be a marine biologist. And before that, I was fond of animals in the ocean. So when I dissected the clam, that just nailed it. That did it for me, and I said that's what I want to do. And so that's basically how it all started. And I just kept pursuing it. It kept going after it after that.
Wow, that's really interesting. So, when you entered higher education, what did you think you were going to do with your academic career? And what fueled your decision to pursue a PhD in zoology?
Right. Well, great question. So when I was an undergraduate, almost time to graduate, I wanted to know what kind of jobs I could get. And so there was a bulletin board and where I went for undergrad was near the ocean. So there was a bulletin board of local jobs. And all of them were minimum wage. Now, there's nothing wrong with minimum wage, but I'm thinking I worked hard 4 years of college. I want to make more than minimum wage. If I was going to do minimum wage, why did I go to college? So then I said I'm going to have to go to graduate school, and I wasn't necessarily thinking about PhD. I just knew that if I went to graduate school, I would make more than minimum wage. And so I looked at the different bulletin boards that were there, and my first choice was Duke, which I did get into, but it was my first choice because of the research the professors were doing there. And actually, the other schools I applied to, Duke was the only one I got in, and that was my favorite choice, my best choice. And so when I started going to graduate school, I didn't want to be a professor because when I was an undergraduate, um, I would hear the professors complain about the pay. So I didn't want to be a professor, but I wanted to do research and use marine animals as indicators of pollution. So that's what I wanted to do, and I don't know what industry does that, but that's what I wanted to do. So um, I was talking to professors there through graduate school about, what can you do besides be a professor, and really none of them had answers. And so I stayed on the path of being a professor because no one else instructed me on what else to do. I mean, there was another graduate student. She ended up going with the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, but I didn't know much about it. I just stayed on the path that you're educated to do. So I became a professor before I was at Fairleigh, and I was talking to someone at NOAA, um, a lab that I was familiar with because it was next door to the Marine Lab when I was in graduate school, and I asked them, "Do you have any jobs, for somebody with a PhD?" And they said yes, but the job is it's usually one person with a PhD that's the supervisor, and the others have bachelors, so the minimum wage jobs. But he said that what we do is if we need a specialist, we contract out the professors. And that's when I realized being a professor is no problem with it because if you're contracted out, you could make additional money or with grant money to supplement your what you're making as being a professor. So it actually wasn't that bad for me. And so what I ended up doing, I ended up doing what I originally wanted to do, which is to use marine animals as indicators of pollution. Um, and I like the animals like clams or barnacles and shells because again, my shy nature, but also I learned how their behavior could be used to determine if they're doing well or not before they even die. Like you could see like early indications of death, and that's how you can how what you can use to indicate what's going on in the environment. And particularly because these animals can't move, they tell the story of that initial environment they're in. So that's what I liked about them as well. They can't escape; they're attached, but they tell the tale of their environment. And so it kind of all came full circle in a way. Like even though I didn't um, work straight in the industry, and became a professor, I still ended up doing work that used marine animals as indicators of pollution. And some of my work, not all of it, does that.
I think that's amazing that you knew that you wanted to use marine animals as indications of pollution, indicators of pollution. Wow. You mentioned that you became a professor, and I thank you for your service in education because
Oh,
you are very much needed.
no,
Now,
thank you.
you teach courses such as biological diversity, molecules, cells, and genes. You teach introduction to marine biology and laboratory. You teach oceanography,
Hmm.
animal behavior, biology seminar, human ecology, behavioral ecology, and neuroscience,
Hmm.
and physiological ecology.
Right.
All of these in the sciences are just, these are all different rabbit holes we can jump into. But if I were to take any of your courses, I would take uh, physiological ecology and behavioral ecology. Can
Hmm.
you can you give our listeners just a little taste? I know those are very deep subject areas in themselves, but
Hmm.
for those of us who are not familiar with these sciences, can you just give us a little taste of what physiological ecology and behavioral ecology 101 looks like?
Right. Well, first, let me start with what ecology is. Ecology means study of the house, and the house is the environment. And so, what it is the interaction between organisms and the environment, which is abiotic, non-living, and interactions between organisms and themselves, and that's biotic. So that's the ecology part. And what happens as a result of those interactions, animals are found, or organisms, I'm a zoologist, so I'm saying animals, but organisms, you could do this with plants, are found in some locations in a large, in large numbers, and they're found in other locations in smaller numbers, and they're found in other locations. They're absent in those. Actually, they're not found in those locations based on the interactions that I've mentioned. So, physiological ecology is basically interactions with the environment, that if they have physiology is how the body works. So if the body is able to handle like low temperatures, then you'll find those organisms in low temperatures. If they're able to handle warm temperatures, then you'll find them in warm temperatures, or somewhere in between, and there'll be a gradient in between there. And it's done by physiology, and it's not just temperature. It could be your body is adjusted or able to adapt to a certain amount of salt, a certain pH, acidity. So all these different parameters. The body is how the body works, and there'll be a sweet spot where you'll find them. And then behavioral is the same thing. And behavior is what an organism does. And so some behaviors allow, and in physiology too, allow survival. And if you don't do if the animal doesn't behave a certain way, they won't survive. And those behaviors would be like how to avoid a predator, or how to be a predator to get your food. And to do that, there's behavior. It's what they do to do it to the best of their ability. And the best that they do it, you'll find them. That's where they'll be, in a larger numbers, and areas where they're unable to do it either because they're not familiar with the prey, or they're not able to avoid being eaten. You'll find them in smaller numbers. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what those two areas are. They overlap with each other.
Thank you so much for that. I think you have just planted the seed in one of our listeners to dive into this world of marine biology and ecology in general. It's just so interesting.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
kind of switching gears just a little bit from the student to the teacher, how have your experiences as an educator impact how you teach?
I think I look at teaching as sort of a story where it has a beginning and a middle and an end, and you have to build that story. So you have to, like stairs, you have to do step one and build a foundation. Start with basics, and then when you have that, then you can go a little bit further, and then a little bit further, and a little bit further. So basically, especially the courses I teach, um, I assume, especially like freshman courses, that they haven't taken this course before. They have no idea what it is. So I explain it to someone as if they're hearing it for the first time, and start with the basics and then build from there. So that's kind of like what I've gotten over the years. Just imagining that I'm them, and what I need to hear or have it presented so that I understand it. Like for instance, if I'm teaching a course um, that has a little bit of chemistry, um, and and maybe I've had to learn it myself, so I'm going to teach it like I learned it, and that's going to be from the bare basics, the bare minimum, bare bones, and then I start to add things on, layer it on. And I tell students sometimes, some of you might already know this, but just bear with me. Like I have to take this approach because that's just some students might not get it if you don't do it that way.
Absolutely. Someone out there doesn't know, and
Hmm.
and they're walking into this for the first time.
Right, right, exactly.
Dr. McCleary, you have so many talents that I want to touch on, and I really want to get to them through this interview. You're a member of the Northern New Jersey Community Foundation for Environmental Advisory Board. Tell us a little bit about your role in that, and just thank you for being involved in environmental science in general.
Right.
So just thank you for that again. But
Well,
tell us a little bit about your role on the Northern New Jersey Community Foundation Environmental Advisory Board.
right. Well, it's easy to speak to this because I just recently had to do something with this. Um, if if the organization is going to apply for a grant and they have some projects in mind, they will run it past members of the advisory board for input, suggestions, um, um, other people to partner to be involved. Like so, for instance, um, there was this. They wanted to do something with rain gardens, and so they asked myself and another advisory board member about that. You know, where would be a good place to place them? What else can we? What science? What data can be gathered from the rain gardens? What rain gardens do is absorb water, but also what plants do is sort of cleanse the environment as well. So if you have an area with a rain garden, you could measure water quality as it passes through the garden, versus a place where there is no garden, and see if you see differences in water quality and also flow. Does the rain garden slow the flow down? Or versus if you don't have the rain garden, so things of that nature. So it's the hydrology and things of that. So so they asked about that, and also people like at my university that might be involved in that kind of work. Um, because I'm not a hydrologist, but I know people that are, and so those kind of things, just like just weighing in on projects and just giving input, and critiquing the writing of it and things of that nature.
That perspective is so important.
Hmm.
Now, for our listeners of the Black Doctoral Network, we got to touch on a little bit of sports.
Okay.
Dr. McCleary is also the chair of the faculty athletics representatives of Northeastern Conference and a member of the NCAA Division One Committee on Academics. So, on this committee, Dr. McCleary crosses paths with academic matters, including policy, eligibility standards, NCAA Division One academic performance programming, steps. Just this is super cool. So I just had to ask. So please tell our viewers, what would you like our audience to know about NCAA Division One policy and the academic performance program as it involves with your role?
Right. Well, first, let me explain what a FAR, faculty athletic representative, is first, and then I'll get into that. Actually, by defining it, I kind of is a good segue. So, as you know, with sports, coaches and athletes, and especially if these athletes are good, want to play, they want to win. But it's being done in an academic setting. These aren't pros, and so they're done in an academic setting. So they're a student first, and so the NCAA wants a way to make sure that the student athletes that are competing actually are students and have the grades that allows them to compete. And so what the FAR, faculty athletic representative, is another pair of eyes outside of the athletic department, that if the athletic department says this student is eligible and okay to compete, we're the outsider, we're that check and balance to either agree or disagree with what the athletic department says. And so as in the NEC conference, we have every university, college has a FAR, division 1, 2, or 3, and they do the role I mentioned. And so being chair of the FARs, what that really means is the student groups that meet student government of the athletes. And so I attend those meetings because I get to hear their issues and what they talk about, their concerns, and then I bring it back to the FARs. Like, so for instance, we'll have a conference with icebreakers and workshops. And one of the things is, do you know who your FAR is? Because sometimes we're in the background. We're not that visible. We could be, it depends on the FAR, but some student athletes may not know who their FAR is. Some student athletes might have issues competing because the professors don't like them missing classes. And so as the chair of the FARs, I'll hear this at this conference and then bring it back to them and let them make them aware that the student athletes at their institution don't know who they are, or that there's issues with them missing classes because of competition. And just to make them aware of it so they can at their institution find ways to solve that issue. The academic advisors try to schedule it so that when the sport is in season, they don't miss as many classes. So it's a balancing act. So it's basically to let them know if it's needs more, attention to the balance or not. And in terms of the NCAA, the national wise aspect, there's policies they're looking into in terms of the SAT. As you know, some schools were first because of COVID. Students had a hard time trying to take the SAT because of COVID. And now that things are changing, it's getting better. I won't say it's gone completely, but there's still issues with the SAT because it's culturally biased, as you probably know. And so the NCAA is thinking about, is that something we should consider? Should we consider, not weighing the SAT as heavily as it has been in the past? So policies like that, policies about COVID, in terms of making some allowances for the fact that we went through COVID and online all of a sudden, and it caught everybody by surprise. So issues like that. It's many others as well, but those are the ones that just come to mind right away.
Beautiful. Now we're gonna make another pivot. Like there's so many things we can talk about. We're gonna make another pivot because I've got to whet the research palette. You conducted an investigation that was published in Urban Habitats, and this was at Sawmill Creek of New Jersey's Hackensack Meadowlands. Right. Can you tell us a little bit about your findings?
Yes. Well, okay. So quickly, there was 2 grasses in the Meadowlands, and it's not just the Meadowlands. This is a nationwide thing. There was actually a conference on this years back. Like with research, sometimes it's a hot topic and everybody's on it. And people are still working in this area now, but it's not as hot as a topic as it was, like when I published this work. But basically, there's 2 grasses. One of them is, I guess you would say, a native, and that's the Spartina alterniflora. And you could think of this, I've thought of like an example so people can understand. Think about that as the grass that you want in your lawn. Like the grass you want, because it's native. And also studies were showing that insects and fish, a lot of organisms utilize this grass. Then you have Phragmites australis, which is not native. It was brought over from the Netherlands by the Dutch. They brought it over to make roofing material to thatch their roofs. So it's not native, and they grew it along the Hackensack River. Well, it grows taller than Spartina and can cause sediment to accumulate and close waterways. So basically, the Phragmites is like the weed, and so that you want to get rid of in a lawn. And so some people were using chemicals like rodeo, which would kill the Phragmites along with other measures like cutting and digging it up. But the rodeo was harmful to some animals in the environment. So some biologists were opposed to the use of rodeo. And so what they wanted to do is basically say, okay, well, what's the benefits of Phragmites? Before you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, it may cause some problems because you could call it a weed, but it is useful. And so some studies were done and showed that insects preferred the Spartina, birds preferred the Spartina, and my study with mussels, because mussels, and these are the same mussels that you eat, not this species of mussel. This species of mussel was the rib mussel, but we eat it's called the edible mussel. It's found in the ocean as opposed to the marshes. My study was to figure out which grass would they prefer, and it turns out the baby mussels, are not picky. They're opportunistic, so they will attach to the first thing they encounter. So in many places, since Spartina is native and really a freshwater plant, saltwater plant, the mussels would attach to the Spartina, and behind the Spartina would be the Phragmites, and it would look like they didn't want to attach to the Phragmites. That wasn't the case. They just encountered the Spartina first because it's a saltwater plant. So my research looked at a place where instead of them being in front and behind each other, they were side by side. And my study showed when they were side by side, the mussels didn't have a preference. They liked both equally. And people were even shocked. They would come to me and say, because I presented this at the conference, they like frag. I said, yeah, if Spartina's not blocking them, yes, they will settle there. And another professor did work, and the work showed that the fish hung out around the Spartina, which killed her argument the frag is viable. But her master's student looked at what the fish were eating, and it turns out they were eating Phragmites. So that showed that Phragmites has some value. I mean, there's some issues with it. You could call it a weed if you want, but it is utilized by mussels if given the opportunity to be exposed to the mussels. And it's used as food for fish, which if you got rid of the Phragmites, that fish wouldn't have that food, and then it would disrupt the food chain. So that part with the fish wasn't my study, but my study just showed that it had some value. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
That is so very cool. Thank you for your research.
Oh, you're welcome.
That is very cool. Let's talk a little bit more about you.
Okay.
Who has had a tremendous impact on you and your career field?
I would have to say my PhD advisor, just because I remember when I was a graduate student, he was very energetic, and I remember he used to drink coffee, black coffee, no sugar. And I remember he would go to get his coffee in the dining hall, and the undergrads would say, "No, stop! You don't need it," because he was so hyper. And then someone else said, "Yeah, I couldn't find you." He said, "Yes, you can. Just stay still for a minute. You'll see me walk by." And so I say that because I kind of see myself like him now. I have my coffee. I have it beside me now. I don't drink it black, but because but I do drink it without sugar. But I've kind of sort of hyper like him, maybe not as much as him, but so I think that, and it's just that I don't know, it just influence and it's in just and also too the way I teach. This just came to me just now. Um, when I was in graduate school, there was no PowerPoint. It's actually transparency. So what he would do, he would put a transparency up, and he would kind of he would talk his notes out and write them out on the transparency. And his handwriting wasn't the neatest, and neither was mine. But I remember watching him and saying, "I'm going to do that too," because I didn't want to read from a book, and that's what he didn't do. But but you wanted to have notes for the students because you could see I talk fast. In this way, it sort of slows me down, or they could see what I'm doing. So I saw what he was doing, and I said, "I'm going to do that, except I'm going to type mine out." Because my handwriting is going to be bad. So I actually typed my notes out and was using transparencies. And then now that I'm using PowerPoint, and I know it's probably not the newest thing to use, but that's what I'm using now. I have my notes typed up. I project them on the screen. And what I like about that is I can underline and emphasize. So it's a script. They could see, even though I talk fast, I read what it says, but then I say it again in a different way. I emphasize it by circling and underlining the different colors so they can grasp what I'm doing. I also make my PowerPoints available for them. So this way, for students that aren't good note takers, and I think they should still take notes because I'm speaking things and I'm saying the same thing, but in a different way. And drawing pictures, I have pictures in my PowerPoint too, but I put side drawings, and that's what they should take notes on. But I provide the PowerPoint notes just so that to make up for the fact that I'm talking fast, and so they have it. I know some professors don't like you to give the PowerPoint notes because then the students don't take notes. But I still say they should take notes anyway. But I want to give them the PowerPoint because that's like the skeleton of what I'm speaking about. So I think I'm my PhD advisor. I would say because, and I didn't that the note thing just came to me just now. That's not even what I had in mind to say, but yeah.
That's awesome. In the educational research realm, we call that universal design for learning
Okay.
and multiple means of representation.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I'm a visual learner, so I like to have pictures and if they're provided, if not, I'll sketch my own. But I tell the students I do this because there's a lot of stuff I teach. It's not my expertise, but I have to teach it. The pictures help me, so I just use what again. I had to teach myself to teach it some things, and then I'm going to teach it to them as I learned it. So that way they're seeing it from the ground up. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes,
Seeing
yes.
it and hearing it. And then when they in the lab, they actually touch and feel it and do it with their hands.
Mhm.
Yeah. So try to, like get multiple approaches for different types of learners.
Absolutely, absolutely. Universal design for learning. I love it. I love it. I
Great,
love
great,
it.
great.
So, what advice would you give to someone who is interested in pursuing a career that is similar to yours?
Right. Well, I would first say, well, now if they have an advantage because with the internet, they could do it, find out a lot more than I did. Before it was, postings on a bulletin board, and luckily the right schools were there for me that that fit. But if what they're interested in, they could do, look on the internet, maybe with a Google search, but find a professor that's doing research that they're interested in. And what's good about that, if it's for a PhD, most likely the professor is writing grants, and if the student or prospective student makes themselves known to the professor that they're interested in their research, um, the professor would encourage them to apply, and then um, with conversations with them, possibly if they have a grant already or about to get a grant, can write in stipend money for that student so that they could basically get a full ride or at least partially. Um, I would recommend if they could do a PhD to do that because I know when I was a graduate student, and I don't know if it's still like this, but when I applied, it said, do you want to get a master's or a PhD? And this was the zoology department. And it said it, and people think I'm joking, but it's true. It said, no, if you say master's, you will not be accepted. So they wanted you to do a PhD. And the reason why, you're there longer. Like a master's goes quickly. And so for the sciences, they're training you. They want you there for a long time. And so now you could get a master's if you were there and you decided this is not for me. You could end with one, but they didn't want you to come in with that. They wanted you to commit for a longer haul. So that's what I ended up doing. And that's how I went for a PhD. It's not that, I mean, I told you when I was an undergrad, I just wanted to go to graduate school. It just so happened I was in a department that encouraged the PhD. And so that's what I did. Well, first I wanted to be accepted. And there was times, when things don't work out, you want to quit. But at that point, it was like 4 years, and I'm like, or 3 years. I'm like, no one I don't does a master's full time 3 or 4 years. So if I'm this far, I might as well keep going. So I had to really motivate myself to keep going. But it's times that you want to quit just because experiments don't always work out like you like. And so it can be frustrating, but I just persevered because I said I can't justify all of this time, without going the whole way. But also too, the school also, if I would encourage them to talk to the professors, because some schools, even if the professor doesn't have a grant or they have one, but they're in between grants, then the school might have money. And usually that rotates around different professors. So some of it is timing, and if you just let them know you're interested, they can tell you when they're up for funding. And even if they do have funding for some of the years, when they're up for funding, could catch, you could utilize that on the year that their funding ran out before they get the next grant. So that's what I would say. Yeah, but you first have to find a project that you want to do, or have some idea, and then find out what the professor does, and then figure out if that's something you would like to do.
Thank you for that negative goal. That's really interesting. A lot of students pursuing their PhD are not aware of those NHS grants and things that happen on that realm. So thank you for pointing out that area of just wisdom to look out for.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your biggest accomplishment to date.
Well, the biggest, I would probably say, this was a big one for me because it was a surprise. I'm also the coordinator of the LSAMP, Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation in STEM at FDU, which is part of the GS, or Garden State LSAMP of New Jersey. And what this is, LSAMP is a national program with two major goals. One is to double the number of minority students that get an undergraduate degree in STEM, which FDU did do along with others in New Jersey. And the second goal is to increase the number of minority students that want to pursue a PhD in STEM. And minority in STEM means basically, Black, African American, Latino, Native American, Pacific Islander. Those are, because the other groups aren't minorities in STEM. And even though they might be a minority in the country, in STEM, they're not. And so, I'm involved with that. And what was your question again? Let me just circle back. That was to set me up. You said what again?
No, you're fine. We want to hear about your biggest accomplishment.
Yes, here we go. Thank you. All right, thanks.
Yes.
So I'm involved in that. And here's the accomplishment, I think the biggest one. I got the presidential citation at FDU. The president of FDU gave me a citation because of my work with LSAMP. I knew I brought up LSAMP for some reason. And the reason why that was a big one is because you're not nominated for it. Like, the president just handpicks you based on what you're doing. So like you don't know what's coming, and you don't have to ask people, nominate me for this. It's like you can't suggest it. The president just comes up with it. So I would say that one because it was unexpected. It was no cajoling or or arm twisting for that to happen. So I would say that one.
That's fantastic. Handpicked.
Yeah. Thanks.
It's wonderful when you can be acknowledged for your hard work by your supervisors.
Right. It was also perfect timing too, because I was going up for full professor, and I had to write my letter for that in support of myself. And I actually did the application. The paperwork was due before the ceremony for me to get it. And so, but it was going to happen. So it wasn't like I was lying, but I worked that in, and it happened to be the year I was going up. So that just extra push to give me, full professorship. So happy about that.
Congratulations. Yeah, that is absolutely an accomplishment. Yeah, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, it was perfect timing.
those are big shoes to fill for the next question, because the
Oh, okay.
next question is, where are you going next?
Right. Yeah, I thought about that. Well, one, um, I think I would like to be. I don't really want to be a dean. I mean, I didn't want to be a department chair either, but no one else wanted to do it. And the dean at the time, it is funny. This is a little quick story with this. Faculty when the natural sciences, because I'm in biology now, but we used to be natural sciences. We were hearing that the dean was going to combine us with the school with the school of nursing. So we're like, what? So, and that's what others were telling us. But the dean said nothing to us, so we let it go. A year later, it was a year, the dean um, wanted a director of the department, and the director was currently, well, the person he wanted to be director was a faculty member, but was also doing something else in the university, heading up global partnerships. So the dean wanted that person to come back because he actually wanted him to come back and be director. So, but this person was appointed by the president of the university to run global partnerships. So he went to the president, said, the dean wants me to step away from that and come back to the department. Will you allow it? He said no. So the dean said, if you don't do it, I'm going to merge you with the School of Nursing. So a year ago, this rumor was true. It just took a year to happen. I think the dean was talking about what he was going to do. So this professor said, how can I do both jobs? The president won't let me leave global partnerships, but I don't want natural sciences with nursing. So he said, I'm going to get 2 associate directors. So I was one of them, and a chemist was another one. And we did it because we didn't want to be merged with nursing. So it kind of, and so that would happen then. We did that for a few years, and then the person who was director, he was no longer global partnerships, and he came back as a regular faculty member, and that associate director and I rose up to be directors. But we stayed doing it because no one else wanted to do it. So anyway, I becoming a dean, I wouldn't think it would happen that way. But I really didn't want to be a chair, but I am, and I'm enjoying it. So I wouldn't want to be a dean. I guess the next step would be just to be able to um, do more research, because as a chair, I'm doing a lot of paperwork, a lot of administrative, and if that means doing more research because I'm not chair, or just collaborating with people, I just want to get more back into the research. That would be the next step, whether I'm chair or not. But I want to get back to the research, because that's why I became a professor. Like I tell people, I didn't become a professor to be a chair of a department. I became it because of the research, and so I want to be able to get back to that. And do that more than I'm doing. I'm still doing it, but not to the level that I would like. Yeah.
Please come back to the research. We need you.
Yes, yes.
We need you. That's fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
How has your affiliation with the Black Doctoral Network enhanced your career?
Right. It's allowed me to tell my story to others. Like, for instance, I've been at FDU 21 years, and before that, I was at an institution for 2 years. And I haven't really had a chance to explain the things that I've talked to you about tonight. And mostly because a lot of the students want to go to medical school, and they know I didn't go to medical school. So they figure, I don't know that route, which I don't. I mean, I do know from what people have told me. So, but it was one occasion I was able to speak to a student. I think he just asked me, how did you do it? And I said, basically, it was hard work. You had to be really dedicated. And then as I was talking, I had to, remind myself to tell him that you have fun too, because if you see like it's just work, like all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, as the saying goes. So I told him you can have fun and friends, but I said you have to make sure that person's not going to pull you off your track, or they have goals and that they want to pursue too. So you don't pull them off theirs either, So there is some fun to be had, and also make learning fun, make studying fun. If it's really what you want to do, it will be fun. There may be some courses you don't like, but I didn't like calculus. I had to psych myself into liking it, and I actually did. So those kind of things. There's a lot of mind games tricks you got to play with yourself. I also used to nag myself that if I wasn't studying, I was my own worst enemy. Like it would keep bothering me that I'm not studying, so I would do it. So so I mean, not everybody has that, but I just had a way of nagging myself. So I like with the Black Doctoral Network is allowing me to tell this story to people who I don't get to tell it, because I'm not asked, and I work things in when I can, but some things are very specific, and unless they come and ask me how did you do it, and then I have a chance to tell them. So that's what I think. That's and that really helps me because, and also too, you know, with this network, it's bigger than talking to one person. It goes out, so it affects more people than you may never ever meet. But at least the word is going forth. So that's what I like about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Moving the needle forward.
Yes.
For,
Yes.
for everyone. Well, gosh, I want to keep going, but
Okay.
this is a recorded session.
Right. Right.
Our viewers are going to be so appreciative when they watch this. You've just given us so much,
Great.
really background knowledge too, which is
Yeah.
really, I appreciate it even for myself.
Oh, great. Good. Thank you.
In this space and place. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It has truly been a pleasure, Dr. McClary.
My pleasure as well.
Will you please tell our viewers and listeners where they can go to learn more about the work that you are doing?
Okay. Well, you could go to www.fdu.edu. And if you Google my name, Marion, MARION, MCCLARY, in the search box, you'll find it that way. Even if you do it in Google, you'll find some things. They could email me at McClary, my last name, MCCLARY at FDU.edu. FDU is Fairleigh Dickinson University. And I'll be happy to speak to anyone if they have specific questions or want me to go into more detail about something. I'd love to do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay,
To our listeners, be sure to stay connected to the Black Doctoral Network and connect with Dr. McClary and connect with Black Doctoral Network on our social media channels. Thank you so much for joining us today on Black Doctors Talk Podcast. Thank you for your membership in the Black Doctoral Network, and we hope you will join us again next time. But for now, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and tell a friend. Thanks so much, and we'll see you.